Oh, sorry, yes. Tea, Peter.
Okay. Okay, guys, we should be live.
Right. Hello, Mister.
All right, everybody. We are live. How's everyone doing? If you guys can hear me, let me know in the chat. If you can see all three of us, you should be seeing all three of us on the stream as well. Let me know. Welcome to another Duran Live number 46. How's everyone doing this Wednesday? We hope you are well. Join. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
The chat? Yeah? Okay. My chat's not moving along, so I don't see any movement on the chat. Okay, Valley, yes. Says, all right, thank you, Valley, yes, thank you. Okay. Let's go, let's roll. We have in Moscow, the host of RT's Crosstalk, Mr. Peter Lavelle. Peter, how you doing today?
Today's the first day of winter. We have kind of wet snow, and it's getting dark earlier and earlier, so the winter is here. Okay, so we will be the sunshine of broadcasting for the next 6 months.
Good way to put it. And we have in London, the Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander Mercurius. How are you doing, Alexander?
I'm very well. It's a bright day, actually, today. Unusual. London is like this. We can go from dark, gloomy, moody days to bright ones. But of course, this is election time in England. We're not going to talk. We are not going to talk about that. At least I hope not on this video, on this program live stream, in any great detail, because we covered it fully recently. But it's obviously a time when, shall we say, there's a spark in the air. There always is in election time in England.
It's that time of season, huh?
Yeah.
Election
well,
season.
I mean, we've got Christmas and we've got an election, both looming.
Then we have Halloween tomorrow. So
and we have Halloween, indeed, of course, absolutely.
Yeah, Halloween, and the spooky impeachment inquiry.
Well,
tomorrow. Which
I don't know. Alex Christopher, you know the programs I watch every single morning. Yeah. It's hard for me to get disturbed by this all. I mean. There's nothing there. What are they talking about?
Yes.
It is so befuddling.
Well,
it really is kabuki theater.
The words she's using, Pelosi, is affirm.
Yes.
The impeachment inquiry, not authorize.
Yes. Yes, she does.
That one word. She says affirm, not authorize.
In the age of Me Too, consent has many words. Okay,
yes.
Great.
Yes. Okay. She doesn't want to admit that there was anything wrong with it. So if we authorize it, then of course what happened before never happened.
Exactly.
If we affirm it, then of course that sort of gives a legalization of what had happened.
Well, this
previously.
is the biggest political gift Donald Trump could ever wish for.
Yeah.
Wish for.
Yeah.
There's no there. Okay.
No.
There's no crime. High crime or misdemeanor at all.
Well, that's
this is it. Just like I said, it's just so befuddling because I'm old enough to remember Watergate. I'll tell everyone I never missed a day of school from kindergarten to graduating from high school, except for I played hooky and I stayed home and watched the Watergate hearings on TV on a little tiny black and white TV. Because I was so fascinated what was going on. That was a real impeachment process here. This is the circus.
Yes. Well, you put your finger on it, Peter, because no one has actually so far identified a crime. In every other impeachment that there has been of Andrew Johnson, of Richard Nixon, of Bill Clinton, there was, if either a crime or in Andrew Johnson's case, an alleged violation of the law. Right. There's nothing like that here. There is absolutely nothing like that here. The worst that they can say is that this conversation, and it's, well, if it is any more of a conversation, that there's something inappropriate about it.
But it's been made public.
Well, I know.
You can read it for yourself. I mean,
indeed.
I've commented, and I'll be very, very clear about it. I think it is probably the best example of vintage Trump you can come across. It's meandering and wanders around.
Yeah.
It's very, very wordy. It's very imprecise. It's very much about Donald Trump, the stream of consciousness. You can criticize it all you want, but it's not illegal.
No.
And at the end of the day, and I'm not going to do any programs on impeachment because I can't grab onto anything. At the end of the day, it's very simple. What this all means is that members of the deep state have decided that the president of the United States cannot have his own foreign policy. He must represent their foreign policy. He must enact their foreign policy. And they, the people I'm talking about, they were never elected by anybody.
No.
So this is a subversion of the democratic process. It is the subversion of our three-branch government and checks and balances and separations. This is a major assault. I have said ever since the very, very beginning of this so-called Russiagate thing is that this is an attack on institutions, not just a person, on institutions. And the damage it is wrecking, it will be very difficult, if impossible, to pick up the pieces afterwards. It's not about Donald Trump. It's about who determines the foreign policy of the United States. And he doesn't have very many thoughtful, intelligent, resourceful allies in all of this. And that's partly his fault, too.
Yes.
So, I mean, Alexander Christopher and I have said from day one, I think from the very, very first podcast that we made, Donald Trump has a huge HR policy problem. And we're seeing it being played out in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, since we're already into it, you guys want to get rolling? Let's get moving on to the topics. We have a lot to discuss. There's a lot of news.
Yeah.
But let's see. Let me pull up a Zero Hedge article, Peter. And we're going to be talking first about all the protests that are taking place. And let's start with Lebanon. I think Lebanon is actually real key. And the premise of that protest is a WhatsApp tax. That's the premise of it. And you'll get into how real that narrative is or how unreal it is. Anyway, here's a quote from Zero Hedge, Peter. I want you to comment on it. It says, "We now have mass public unrest on and off in France, Spain, and that 24% AfD vote in Germany, and Brexit in the UK, Algeria, Iraq, Lebanon, Egypt, Russia, Hong Kong, Venezuela, Chile, Ecuador, and Bolivia, plus deepening polarization in the US, and one could add the middle class disruption of Extinction Rebellion in Australia, Canada, and others." What do you make of that, Peter?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I did a program on this yesterday on Crosstalk, and it's on air right now, and it's on YouTube right now. And it's in some ways it's very difficult to draw some commonalities with all the ones that you mentioned, but I think there is one. It is basically the middle class is striking back. Okay, since the 2008 financial crisis, the rich have only gotten richer and the poor have only gotten poorer. And it's really, in all of these countries, it's about the inequality in income. And people protest not because they're miserable, they protest because they have aspirations. That is historically true. And if you look at all of these people, they're demanding some promises to be kept because we have elites now that are indifferent to the public. And Lebanon is a country very close to my heart here, and it is a deeply corrupt place. And the middle, and it's very interesting if you look at Lebanon, and this is the key to it. It's non-sectarian, a country that is the very definition of sectarianism. Okay, I mean their constitution is built on sectarianism to keep the peace. And now what we have the protests, these people with access to social media, WhatsApp is one of the most important ones. And they're communicating their grievances, and this is going across sectarian lines. It's Sunni, it's Shia, it's Christians, and the government is falling apart. The prime minister resigned yesterday, as I was on air, and I think you go, particularly look at like in Iraq, when you look at all of the broken promises, that the middle class is big. I mean, think about a country that has gone through a lot in this century, and that's Iraq. You have protests in Egypt that are very, very strong with the same reasons. Corruption. You have, I don't know, it differs from country to country, but you're looking at like half the population under the age of 21. Okay. And do they see a future for themselves? No, they don't. And Lebanon is a bellwether for at least the Middle East. What happens there first spreads elsewhere. So the social media element is just giving it a lot more oxygen. It's almost putting it on steroids, and people are aware that they're not alone. They're not alone in their disappointment and disenchantment with their ruling elites. And so the difference is social media, and it can be, and it can be used for nefarious reasons. I mean, I even asked on my program yesterday, I mean, you know, some people are using the Soros word, you know, trying to inflame things. Okay. I don't discount that. But I think in the case of Lebanon and in many of these other countries, it is genuine grassroots. People are fed up with the neoliberal order and how it is being practiced and who benefits from it.
Alexander, John says in Holland, anti-EU farmer protests almost on a daily basis. I saw someone else in the live stream said that list is not even close to complete. So I mean, yeah, obviously there's more countries we could add to that list. What do you make of what's going on, Alexander?
And let me add, but you know, because of course protests can take many forms. They can also express themselves through elections. We've seen a major electoral challenge to the political system, to the political status quo in Argentina, where the government there, the president there, was defeated in a presidential election where just a few months ago, he'd been the favorite, though why he was the favorite, given the depth of the economic crisis in Argentina is a good question. And we've seen violent protests in Ecuador, in Peru, in Chile, where the protests have become very, very big. And I'm going to take a country out of that list from Zero Hedge, which you read out. I was really surprised, and Peter, of course, is there, that Russia was included, because Russia actually is extremely calm. There were some protests, demonstrations, I should say, not during the recent Moscow city elections, but of course they are the same people who always turn up at these protests and have been doing so for the last 20 years, and they're a very small group of people indeed. And
Alexander from Command Unit says, while you're on Russia, says, what do you think Putin is doing and should do in Russia to secure it from people like Navalny? Can you talk about him and why he's dangerous to Russia?
Well, I'm not convinced that Navalny actually is particularly dangerous to Russia. I mean, it always looks from the outside, because these people get so much attention that they represent a major political movement or force. When you are in Russia, just isn't so. I mean, this is a very isolated group of people.
Nobody's talking about him.
Exactly. I mean, you know, they all spend all their time with each other. They protest sometimes. They can be, frankly, annoying when they block streets and do things. But this is a very calm country, very stable place overall. And to sort of bring in Navalny and into this general discussion seems to be bizarre, because, I mean, there is no comparison between these little protests that happened in Moscow and these great uprisings that we're seeing in places like Lebanon, Iraq, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, and all of these sort of things. This is complete variation from another. What can the government do about Navalny? I think they've gradually learned that the best thing that they can do is as little as possible.
Ignore him.
Ignore him. He's not very popular. He's not very widely supported. Sometimes he deliberately, intentionally oversteps the limit in order to draw publicity.
And a lot of his support, and a lot of his, I mean, I don't want to be too sarcastic here, but a lot of his followers aren't old enough to vote. I mean, seriously, okay? Yes. One of the things, maybe to answer the question, it's a good question, but answer it in maybe a slightly different way, is that you have to understand in the early 2000s, American NGOs were told to pack up and leave. Okay, and particularly after the the 2012 election. I mean, it's just like, stop your meddling in the domestic affairs of Russia. Get out. And so they were just thrown out, and no one misses them. Okay, except for people that were at the money trough. Okay. There's an excellent article at the American Conservative right now. I put it on Facebook about how foreign aid only increases corruption in corrupt countries. It's a brilliant article. It's very short, but it's very, very smart. Okay, and so Russia isn't a recipient of that largesse that makes things worse, not better.
Alexander JS says in Chile there's coarse legitimate cause for discontent. And we also have Miss Takahara, who says, good morning from Lima, Peru. So we also have from Costa Rica joining us. So Alexander, can we focus a little bit in then on South America to begin?
Indeed.
We touched upon Lebanon.
Absolutely. And I mean,
Middle East. Let's shift gears to South America. You mentioned Argentina as well.
Because it seems to me that this is actually a major epicenter of protest now. And perhaps we've been so focused when talking about South America on the situation in Venezuela at the beginning of this year that we missed the fact that all kinds of other things are going on. Now, I am not a great expert on Latin America. I've never really kept my eye on that part of the world very, very closely. But what I gather is that economic growth has been very weak in South America for some time. There are serious problems of governance. We see neoliberal policies being pursued in many, many places. And what we have seen is a dramatic attempt over the last decade or so, since the sort of red tide of leftist governments receded, by the new, more conservative governments, both to push back on many of the welfare changes that took place during that period from the late 1990s to the mid 2000s, and also to shift tax burdens from downwards increasingly onto middle class and working class people. So as I understand it in Chile, and again, our viewer is undoubtedly much better informed about this than I am, that is what is driving these protests. It is the fact that people feel increasingly under increasing economic pressure. The same thing's happened in Ecuador. The same thing happened in Argentina. We saw a whole succession of, Argentina and Ecuador, by the way, they've also had IMF bailouts with all the horrors that typically go with those. And that's what's triggered protests in these countries. So it is, in a way, there was this expression, globalization and its discontents. South America seems to have been hit particularly hard because of the effects of globalization on these countries, the fact that people are in them are feeling under severe pressure, and the fact that they feel also that the governments in these places are becoming less and less accountable to them and are becoming, in effect, appropriated within the global economic elite.
And also is that these governments are giving tacit approval to immigration northwards, and see what the effects it has on the entire region. All right. I mean, I'm very strict when it comes to immigration. I do believe in building the wall, but at the same time, the U.S. should stop meddling in these countries politically and economically and financially, and let them get their houses in order. Okay, if you have a safety valve, like, just get rid of them, get rid of the people you don't want, because the social welfare system is collapsing all over. Again, as the red tide, quote unquote, receded, a lot of the social programs went with it. Okay, and so then what do you need a government for? I mean, because that's what they. When you have such mass poverty like that, I think it is a good idea to have government intervention to create a middle class. When you create a middle class, then you can start having less government and let the middle classes decide. But they're getting the worst of all possible worlds. The middle class exists. The social welfare that they grew up with is gone. It's not going to come back, and they're being taxed to death. And the government isn't responsive to their needs. I mean, I think it's something like I might be wrong. It's like Guatemala. I mean, they don't even have they have no health care. They rely on remittances from the United States.
Yes.
That's what they do. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, it allows governments to do this.
Yes.
Okay. They don't have spending on education, on healthcare. What you do is, you get it from your relative in Texas, and and buy privately. I mean, it's really disastrous. I mean, I really feel for these middle classes, because they've come into existence only in the last generation. I mean, particularly Venezuela. I mean, you can criticize the government all you want in Venezuela, and it's made terrible mistakes. It is very corrupt, but it created a social welfare system that allowed people to have political agency. And that's what the neoliberals hate the most. Yes. Okay, that these people could have their own agency and make their own decisions. So, I mean, there's such a combination, a really toxic mixture here of so many things that have gone wrong, and people are, and I want to really stress, a lot of these protests and demonstrations and all that, from one degree or another, have a lot of legitimacy. This isn't just, people pulling strings here. In some cases, there's an element of that, but for the most part, people are angry and they're voicing their concerns about it.
Yes. The other thing, and I agree with every point Peter has made, but I would add something else. One of the great problems in understanding some of these processes is that, again, the reporting of this is so poor. Yeah. Now, if we take Argentina, I mean, I'm not going to pretend I'm a great expert on Argentina, but it seemed to me that there was a period of time under Nestor Kirchner and Cristina Kirchner, the previous leaders, when Argentina seemed to be doing relatively well. The economy was growing, things had stabilized, there were many problems, inflation began to rise, and then there was budget deficits. But overall, it was a period of solid economic growth, until perhaps towards the very end. Then a new president comes in called Macri, who is, I believe, one of the richest people in Argentina. The entire media tells you what a tremendous success he is going to be. He's going to be the person who's going to turn Argentina around. He leaves Argentina in a complete and total mess. Inflation is far higher than it was under the Kirchners. The currency is collapsing. There is a massive problem of capital outflow, and the country is in deep recession. On top of everything else, he borrowed $55 billion from the International Monetary Fund. He apparently followed a very much the sort of policies that, the elite basically always follows and are always told to follow. And it has turned out incredibly badly. And yet when I go and I read about all of this in the media, the problems are not, that Macri has made a complete and utter mess of Argentina. It is, we're worried about the fact that Cristina Kirchner as vice president is coming back. She's going to mess things up. How much worse can they be than they are now? I mean, the narrative simply doesn't make sense to me. And then again, you see the same thing happened in Ecuador. I mean, again, maybe Rafael Correa and the previous government, there may have been all kinds of problems with the way it ran Ecuador. But then Lenin Moreno comes along. He goes to the IMF. He reverses all the policies that Rafael Correa pursued. We read in the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal about how, sensible and proper all the things that Lenin Moreno was doing are. He ends up having to borrow large sums by Ecuadorian standards from the IMF. The whole thing, the economy goes into recession. There's there's all sorts of social, economic and welfare policies that Rafael Correa had are abolished. We have protests, we have riots, and yet still we are told that Lenin Moreno is this, exemplar, this pillar of, economic and financial soundness. So, I mean, it's very difficult when things are being analyzed in such a completely weird way to really understand what's going on.
That's such a really good point, because, and I want to point this to the both Alexes, because you're both avid watchers of global news. But wouldn't you guys agree with me let's take a country that, okay, I watch Syria very closely. I watch Lebanon closely. I watch Russia closely. I watch Ukraine closely. I don't watch UK as closely as Alexander Vikiris because I'd lose my mind. Yes. But my point in mentioning these countries is that I follow really what's going on there. And when I watch mainstream media, it's remarkable how they just don't have a clue what's going on. The filters are so amazing. They're talking about places that don't exist. Mm-hmm. And so when I read something about Argentina, depending on where, but I would say, let's say like The Economist, I was like, well, okay, maybe. I'm just very doubtful now because they've been proven to be so wrong in the countries that, reporting on countries that I know so well. So that's why you have to come to Crosstalk. That's why you have to come to us.
Well, indeed. And another example, Peter, following on from what you said, Chile. I've been reading a long time about how well Chile is doing, how it's the great success story of South America. And if it's doing so well, why are people protesting? Why are 1 million people protesting in Chile? Why do we hear that, the causes of the unrest in Chile is justified? And then you drill down and you find actually it's not been doing so well. Some of the, maybe the budget's been kept in reasonable balance, but economic growth for what is still very much of a middle income country has not been so good. And then you also learn that the president of Chile is another exceedingly rich man who has pursued policies that seem to be very favorable to the international investment community, if we can, use that euphemism about our global elite. There is a kind of picture that starts to fit together, but it's very difficult to drill through and get to the real detail because, as I said, the mainstream media doesn't cover it at all well. As I said, Argentina was a disaster under the Kirchners. It was going to be the success under the Macris, but then it turned out to be this even greater disaster in Macri. Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, the same. Chile, supposedly the great showcase success. It turns out it's not actually a success. And no real explanation of it.
And then in Mexico, the Mexican army gives up the kid of a drug lord, and it turns into what looked like a World War I pitched battle. I mean, the state, the structures of the state are very, very unstable in Mexico. Okay, and with all these things going on south of the border, the Americans are more concerned about Donald Trump's phone call to Ukraine when the country south of your border is in a disastrous state. I mean, it shows them how myopic the media is.
Yes.
Peter, from the live chat, I want you to comment on this from Fluctus Rebrum. Neocon and neoliberal imperialists, parentheses globalists, are the problem. They both profit from war and corruption, follow the money. Meanwhile, the rich get richer, the middle class erodes away.
Yeah, no problem with that. Very well phrased. I think it's very, very true.
Well,
okay. I mean, let's look at the case of Ukraine. I mean, months after the Maidan, after the illegal seizure of power, the overthrow of a duly elected government and president, you have the son of the vice president sitting on Burisma Holdings board, raking in the dough. Okay. I mean, talk about, carpetbagging. I mean, this was only, weeks and months after the coup. And then you have international capital, have the Ukraine in their clutches, stripping it away. I mean, exactly. It's extraordinary. But no, this is the aid, quote unquote, the aid the European Union and the United States and international institutions have given to Ukraine have gone to waste. It's all been stolen.
45 billion, Peter.
It's made it worse. It's made it worse, not better.
Yes.
Okay. But as long as they can, quote unquote, deny Russia something, it's worth it. Okay. That's called corruption. That's pure corruption.
Well, it's gone, Peter, from being one of the richest republics of the Soviet Union to being the poorest country in Europe.
Yeah.
After aid threat at it.
No. It gives Moldova, competition. It really is. Okay, yeah. It gives Moldova competition.
Another recipient of generous Western aid, by the way. But there you are.
No, but see, that's called the slippery slope and moral hazard, because, as we've said many times on these podcasts, is that these Western institutions and governments, they target elites and then capture them, and they become alien from their own citizenry in electorate. Okay, they have to ask Brussels and Washington what to do when they should be making decisions on the ground for themselves. It's you can do all you can be like Max Boot and all these other fools on cable TV and look at the world as a chessboard, and that's all nice and fine, because if he's wrong, he just works in another air-conditioned office in the suburbs of Washington. But what about the people on the ground that are on the receiving end of these grand ideas that are supposed to be about democracy? It's never about democracy, ever about democracy. Okay, it's about people like Joe Biden and his son. That's what it's all about.
Alexander, we talk about Ukraine. We talk about Argentina. I've lived it in Greece and in Cyprus. Discuss a little bit the IMF, because I think that's one institution that connects all these countries, the way the IMF works, and it gives out its aid, which then either gets
based on conditionality.
Yeah, based on conditionality. You start adding the interest, you start putting in the austerity, but the money never seems to funnel to the people. It just
it never
disappears.
Never does, because of course the point about the IMF is that it's there basically to ensure the creditors get paid
their money. Yep.
That's what it's all about ultimately. Now it does carry out what it calls restructurings. In other words, it restructures debt, which sometimes lifts some of the financial burden of particular countries, but it does so in ways that make sure that creditors get most of their money. And of course, the IMF insists that it's going to be repaid for all this funding that it provides. And it does so by basically forcing countries into very, very severe economic adjustments, which always, in the end, the people who really suffer from them are the working and middle classes. In other words, it's the people at the lower and middle ends of the economic spectrum who get hammered. What's also starting to happen, incidentally, is that it's becoming increasingly a political tool. So it gives all this money to Ukraine, which it should never have done. Giving money to Ukraine violated its own legal rules. It gave money to Greece, which again, it should never have done. It did that in order basically to help the euro. But even its own legal people said that they shouldn't have lent that money to Greece, because the bailout that was being imposed on Greece was an impossible one and made no economic sense. It made the biggest loan, I think, in its history to Argentina in a way that has escalated massively the economic crisis there. And it has done the same to Ecuador. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a book that gained a lot of traction by, I think it was Naomi Klein, called The Shock Doctrine, which basically says you come in and you create absolute massive disruption and economic shock. Gained quite a lot of traction at that time. Seems to have been largely forgotten more recently. But that is essentially what the IMF does. It creates economic shocks. And one of the major things that has changed over the last 10 years is that it did this in a very big way in the East Asian economies in the 1990s, when it precipitated this extraordinary meltdown of the East Asian economies. The East Asians then decided that under no circumstances were they ever going to borrow from the IMF again. The Russians, by the way, at roughly the same time, came to the same views because they'd been borrowing heavily from the IMF.
Yeah, they got $6 billion. I mean, I was here. They got $6 billion in an emergency money. Where did it go? It disappeared.
Disappeared. So what you've seen, and it's something that has intensified in some ways, the global imbalances is that countries like Russia and the Asian economies have said, never the IMF again. We will never have any dealings with these people ever again. And we're going to insulate ourselves by piling up money in reserve funds. So this has created, you sometimes hear people talk about the global savings glut, the fact that more and more money has been taken out of circulation and is being put into huge reserve funds. That's partly a product of Asian and Russian horror at what the IMF did to them, and their determination that they will never be put in that position again. So that if they ever do find themselves having to carry out significant adjustments, they have large financial reserves that will enable them to do it. So it's that for these countries is a good thing, but it has intensified global imbalances. So the IMF is an extremely dangerous institution.
Yes, it practices shock therapy. The population gets the shock, and the lenders get the therapy.
Well, there you
go. In a nutshell.
You put it very well, Peter. In a nutshell.
Peter, how did Russia get out of it? You mentioned 6 billion. You mentioned it disappeared. How did it get out of it? Because Greece didn't get out of it.
Well,
we got more into it after the IMF.
Okay.
Why did Russia escape the destruction that the IMF puts on?
Primarily, and I know at the time there were many journalists. I was a print journalist, and people really didn't like what I wrote, but it was the truth. It still is the truth, and it was the right truth. Is that Putin went to war with the oligarchs and says, no, the state doesn't work for you. You work for the state. You are highly paid civil servants.
Is that where the IMF goes to, though? I mean, you said 6 billion goes into a country, say, for example,
no. It was
to Ukraine.
It was to stabilize. It was to stabilize the currency, which it didn't do. It had zero effect.
No.
Okay. It had no real meaningful effect at all. I mean, the money came in, it disappeared. Okay. So, I mean, what happened was that you had these oligarchs with Western support. They started privatizing the entire economy. They carpetbaggers on steroids. And basically, when Putin came in and said, that's not how we're going to do this. We're not going to run the country this way or the economy. And Putin did get lucky. You had good oil prices, okay? And so, as Alexander Mercouris was pointing out, a lot of special funds were created and money was poured into it. There were huge political battles about how to spend it because they had money coming in. Putin said, no, we're going to pay off our debts. Russia has virtually no external debt whatsoever. Its internal debt is not very high. It's like 3% of the budget. So, I mean, they've got things under control. And if you've never lived in a high inflation country, and because during that time it was very high inflation, there's virtually no inflation. I sent you that report yesterday, Alexander Mercouris. I mean, very little inflation. If you've lived in a country with high inflation, it is really painful, and it really makes you angry. And once you get it under control, then you have economic growth. So, I mean, what I'm saying is that Putin got the economy in order, and he really, the Yukos affair, Khodorkovsky, all of that, it got everybody in line. These oligarchs are still around. I don't really like the term oligarch anymore because their influence on policy is very limited. I mean, look. I mean, the parliament, the Duma, they every single year, virtually every single year, they go over taxes for natural resource extraction. And the oil companies and the nickel companies and the metals company. I mean, they're begging them, because they're saying you're cutting our profit, and they say no, the natural resources are in Russia. It's Russia's. You're managing it, okay? Well, what about our shareholders? That's your problem, okay? That's your problem to deal with, not ours.
Indeed.
Okay. Go ahead, Alex.
No, what I simply wanted, I mean, all absolutely. And of course, the point about the IMF and the oligarchs is that the IMF consistently advocates privatization. I mean, we see this as a consistent feature of what it does. And in countries like Russia in the 1990s, privatization ultimately means handing over assets, state assets, big state assets, oil companies,
the family jewel.
Exactly. To the oligarchs, to your local internal oligarchs, and of course, to Western financial and business interests. So that's why you get this extraordinary alliance between domestic oligarchs, the IMF, and the international financial community. I've noticed, by the way, that Zelensky has just announced a massive privatization program in Ukraine. And it looks to me as if instead of ending corruption, he's going to intensify, because if you do that kind of thing in that kind of country, it's what the IMF and the Western business commentariat are always urging you to do. But it isn't based on any real analysis of what these countries are actually like.
You know, it's really interesting here. If you look at Western media coverage of Putin when he came to power on New Year's Eve, 1999, 2000, for a short amount of time, he was given a lot of praises. It's always the same phrases: young reformer. It's so boring. But the same dribble that they would write. And then it was the Yukos affair that changed everything, because Khodorkovsky was going to sell Yukos, Russia's largest oil company, to, I think it was ExxonMobil. Okay, and that's when Putin said no. You can manage the company, but you can't sell it to Texans. No way. And no rational leader with the national interest in mind would have allowed that to happen. No country really allows that to happen. Okay, I mean, like what you had in Iran in 1953 with Mossadegh. Fiddling with the assets of Western oil companies. He said, no, we're going to nationalize. It's our oil. It's here. Okay, and we're going to manage it, and we will profit from it. Okay, that's why they got rid of him. Okay, they got rid of him for that. And so not only do you get elite capture, I mean, you saw it in 2008. I mean, here this was the most bizarre case. Putin takes over the economy. It's re-Sovietizing the economy. And then 2008 happens. Then these oligarchs, because they're all overextended into the corrupt, toxic financial system of London and New York. And, they got into really big trouble. And then they turned the narrative. Will Putin save these guys? Will he save his own economy? It on a dime, the narrative switched, okay? Yeah. And Putin made it very, very clear. He wasn't going to bail out these billionaires. You screwed it up. You're the one that invested the company's money in London and New York, not the Russian state, not the Russian president.
No.
And so, I mean, he made it very clear that you're going to have to fix your own problems. You're all richer than God. Now, you got in bed with these people in the West. Now, figure out what you're going to do.
Yes.
Alexander from the live stream, Gobarwala says, only Malaysia's Mahathir spurned the IMF's prescriptions during the Asian meltdown in the 1990s, and he was ridiculed.
Yes.
Only a few years later, the IMF meekly announced that he was correct.
Yes.
Is the way to cure this this globalism, the IMF disease, to just tell the IMF and all these globalist institutions to F off and look within? But on the flip side, what's happening in Lebanon, Peter, is interesting because, they're protesting attacks, supposedly protesting attacks that's going to be levied on WhatsApp, which is owned by the largest globalist social media company in the world. So, I mean, how do you square the circle there?
Well, you say to tell these people to go to F off, in a sense, that's exactly what Putin did in Russia in the 1990s. That's what the Asian economies eventually did, following quite correctly. I remember how much abuse Dr. Mahathir came in for. It wasn't just ridicule. I mean, he was, furiously criticized. People always say, by the way, when they do these sort of things, impose capital controls, which is what Dr. Mahathir did, or start putting away funds and stopping privatization. This is all going to lead to disaster. And of course, it never does. The same happened, by the way, in Argentina with the Kirchners. Instead of going to the IMF, focus on your own economy. Always, by the way, you hear people who talk about focusing on your internal problems and working with your own resources and not handing things over to the international investment community, the global elite. They're called nationalists. I think a better description of them is sovereigntists. You want your own sovereign government accountable to you, acting on your behalf and on behalf of your own country, and also dealing with any problems of governance, of law and order, of justice system, or whatever. And of course, people, leaders, political leaders who do these sort of things are guaranteed to be criticized and are more often than not successful. And when they are successful, they become criticized even more.
Well, what's happening now is that there are institutions now, primarily coming out of China, that are giving the IMF a run for their money.
Yes.
Okay. Because all of when we started talking about this, I used the word conditionality. There's a lot of conditions of what you have to do with your economy, which may not be in the national interests of that country. Okay. And the arrogance of the IMF. And so what for example, the Chinese, I mean, they call this debt slavery. I mean, the Americans are terrified of African countries taking large loans from Chinese banks. And the Chinese it's written into the documents. It's written into the loan. If you screw it up, we get the asset. Okay. I mean, it's there. It's all public. It's not a hidden agenda. It's not a conspiracy. If you want to take the money, we'll give it to you in good faith. But we expect economic and financial progress. What you do with your government's your business. I mean, we don't care. Okay. It's your internal problem. Now, if you want us to give you money to build bridges and ports and railroads and all of that, we can do the infrastructure part. We can do it through loans, and we can actually even help you make sure there is a return on it, because we wouldn't be loaning you the money if we didn't think there was a return, because we have investors too. Okay, and so, but they don't have the political conditionality, like you have to fire the general prosecutor that's investigating my son. Okay, that is the difference here. And there's a very interesting literature out there, and our viewers should take a look at it. Is the world the world without the West is actually an academic area of study, and it's how countries like the BRIC countries, not so much since Brazil kind of dropped out, but I mean, you building up financial institutions that are parallel and outside of the Western neoliberal order. This is one of the things the West, particularly the United States and Wall Street, is terrified of doing, because the more the US uses the dollar as a weapon, the more people are they're saying, we don't want to get involved in your politics. It's supposed to be a fiat currency that has its own value, okay? Not a political value determined by somebody in Washington. And that's why people, see, the mismanagement of the dollar and of the SWIFT system and all of that, they're destroying their own asset, okay? Because there are more and more alternatives, okay? This blockchain thing, don't ask me, I don't understand it, but I keep hearing it and I hear it's pretty interesting. But there's a lot of other new things happening. And the West is squandering all of, not only of its institutions, but it's the ideas about how to run an economy for the benefit of your people. They're undermining it left, right, and center with every passing day.
All right, Alexander, let's go back to Europe and let's talk about Germany. Let's talk about Italy. Let's talk about the AfD and the elections which we covered in Thuringia. Let's talk about Salvini and Umbria and those elections. And Alexander, I want you to tie it in to those parties rising and winning and gaining a lot of support with what's happening in Sweden. And let me read you something from the Gatstone Institute on the gangs that are rising up in Sweden and the crime. There are approximately 50 criminal gangs encompassing around 1,500 criminals operating in Stockholm. There's been a huge rise in gang wars in Malmo, and some people are calling it an epidemic. Are you seeing this rise in what you say, these nation state type of parties, these nation sovereign state type of parties, say Salvini, say AfD? is this connected to what's going on with migration and the rising crime?
It's connected to migration, it's connected to rising crime, it's connected to what Peter was talking about, the pressure on the middle class and working class people who see the economies of the countries they live in no longer work for them, and the governments no longer work for them. It was behind Brexit, the issue, the slogan that encapsulated for many people in Britain what Brexit was all about. The words were taking back control. The idea that we take back control, bring it back to our own country, and we are now our leaders then become accountable once more to ourselves, so that they will actually start working for us, as opposed to working for someone far away in Frankfurt and Brussels, and increasingly it must be said Berlin and Washington, and will start attending to our needs. One of the most extraordinary things about this crime rate in Sweden, and if you know anything about Sweden, you'll know how historically orderly a place it was. It was incredibly one of the most law-abiding places anywhere.
A year could go by when there wasn't a murder with a gun.
Indeed, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, incredibly law-abiding place. This extraordinary crime wave that's happening in Sweden, and the Swedish political class, collectively, apart from some sovereigntist parties, it has simply turned its face away from it. Doesn't really want to address this issue at all. It doesn't want to address the fact that there are now apparently regular bomb attacks and grenade attacks in Sweden, which is extraordinary. I mean, that is an extraordinary thing. And the prevalence of criminal gangs, the rise in drugs culture. Talking about these things is defined as racist and xenophobic, which is, of course, completely
a mischaracterization.
It's a mischaracterization. If people are afraid of having, of having their local bank blown up, then they're not being racist if they express concerns about it, and if they express concerns about the failure of state and public institutions to struggle against this. Now, can I just say, I've never actually visited Sweden. I know Finland, the neighboring country, very well. I don't know Sweden very well. I've never been to Sweden, but I've known many Swedish people, and I'm obviously familiar with some Swedish economic and political history. One of the most striking things about Sweden during its social democratic heyday, which was roughly after, from after the war until the mid-70s, was that the Swedes during that period were very, very careful to keep Swedish companies and Swedish businesses in Swedish hands. They resisted globalization or international pressures. It was very much a central part of social democratic Sweden, is that it was for the Swedes. That's all gone. And now we see what we see as a result of a political elite which is no longer responsive. So of course you see parties now rising in Sweden which are challenging this and are saying, let's bring back control in Sweden. And you ask about Salvini in Italy, winning in Umbria. Umbria, one of the most traditionally left-wing regions of Italy. I mean, it's always had left-wing parties and left-wing governments. Why is that happening? It's because people in Umbria, again, don't feel that they have any real control, that power is no longer responsive to them or accountable to them in any democratic sense. And so they are supporting political leaders who, as far as they're concerned, are the ones who championing bringing back control. It's also happening in Germany with the rise of the AfD. And it's happening in Italy, it's happened in Britain, it's going to happen increasingly in more and more places.
One of the interesting things, I mean, I was a very keen student of I'll show my age here, of West Germany, the Federal Republic.
Yeah.
And, you know, in looking at elections before the end of the Cold War, you always looked at these right-wing parties that would pop up, and they were, I think, quite rightfully dismissed as this protest votes, and they probably were. But now they're no longer protest votes. They're part of the fabric of the political culture. Yes. And they've come about because of the failure of these liberal elites. Yes. And they're going, and on top of it, we have these woke tech companies. Yes. And so they're in league now with the failing establishment to curb the influence of the rise of these alternatives. I don't like using right wing because that's a negative label for most ears, because we're almost all brought up liberal if we like it or not. There are some of us that reject it upon reflection. Yes. But now we have, particularly in Germany, you have an established alternative to the establishment that is sovereigntist. I think that's the term we should be using moving forward. And I agree with Alexander Mercouris. And this is going to be a struggle. It's going to be a struggle for the hearts and minds, because that's what it's gotten down to right now. I mean, what you had with these, you know, center left, center right governments from 1945 up until let's say the turn of this century, it was just basically the management of the economy. Okay, because religion is, secularism is preferred over religion. National histories should be passed over for the history of the European nation. There's no such thing. Okay, but they're all pushing this ideological agenda, and Sweden is one of the most horrific cases, because you have these gangs running around. You have places and cities that are you can't go to. The police don't even go there anymore. I mean, this is failure. This is absolute failure. And people on the ground that want to support their sovereignty are getting motivated. But they have these media companies that are pushing back against them. Okay, I mean, this is it's almost, it isn't almost, it is, it's Orwellian. They want to deny reality. They want to deny the reality on the streets. Yes. Okay, and that's going to is creating chaos, and more of it's going to happen. More of it's going to happen because people just don't want something to eat. I'm sorry. The human soul is important as well. I know that's alien to these people, the human soul, but it is real, and it does motivate us in our life. We are, all of us have, I hate to sound like Nancy Pelosi, but there's a spark of divinity in all of us, okay? Except for when you're a gang, okay, in the United States, or if you're in Sweden. I mean, I say I'm a hardcore law and order guy. Get that stuff cleaned up, okay, and use the means within reason to take care of it, and and face up to your own responsibility. What's happening in Sweden is the lack of responsibility.
Yes. It also involves, and this is another thing which you see very much in places like Sweden and in West Germany also, in Germany, is that, of course, these media groups, which, to be very, very clear, are owned almost entirely by huge international businesses now, which have a stake in maintaining globalization. And what these media groups do is that they manipulate the feelings of humanity and justice that people have. So they say, you've got to keep your doors open, you've got to keep free movement going, because, all of these people who are coming...
But they don't. Well, they don't. They have armed bodyguards, they have security.
But that way, by manipulating people's humanity, by showing pictures, dramatic pictures, people on boats and all this, that enables them to make their opponents, the sovereigntists, look like they're, hard...
deplorables.
Exactly. And it's a very manipulative political language. And of course, what it is doing ultimately is it's making people more angry, because sooner or later, there always comes a breaking point. I mean, we're not there yet in Sweden, we're not there yet in Germany, in Italy and in France. I think essentially we are. Probably in Britain before long too.
All right, guys. Let's do a couple of super chats, and then we'll move over to Syria and to the U.S. with the Ukraine impeachment hoax drama playing out. From Penguins fan Peter, who is this Hariri guy in Lebanon? Is he pro-Western or pro-Saudi Arabia?
Well, he's certainly not pro-Saudi Arabia, because they kidnapped him and made him resign on Saudi television, held him against his will, humiliated him. And he went back to Lebanon and withdrew everything. Hariri is one of the richest families and political dynasties in Lebanon. You know, I mean, he on one level, and certainly he is a defender of his own country, but there's so many people like him in Lebanon that are so deep into the international economy that you have to wonder if their loyalties are confused. So I'm not going to go after him personally, but he's part of the problem, and the way the economy is. I mean, the economy in Lebanon is so intensely unfair. It's so unfair. And there's so much unemployment. And the thing is, too, is that Lebanon is a country with a lot of really smart people. I mean, it's a really, everybody that's disenchanted in the Middle East wants to go to Lebanon because it is run on sectarian lines, but the civil war with the Israel's involvement really did unify the country. It actually created Hezbollah, and now they all know how bad it can get, and that's why it's non-sectarian at this point, these protests. But Hariri and his ilk, they are the problem. They're the problem with what's wrong with Lebanon. Lebanon doesn't make anything. Okay, it imports everything. All right, and the services like telecommunications, well, it's in the hands of oligarchs. All right, and they're the ones that are calling the shots here. I mean, Lebanon is such a jewel, and it's just so badly managed. It doesn't have to be that way.
All right, Alexander from Penguins fan. People say that Russia economy is the size of Italy and Spain. They also say its economy is smaller than New York and California. Is this true?
Yes, this is what always comes up. What people this originates from two different ways of calculating gross domestic product.
Yeah.
One way, which is to simply calculate the size of GDP by converting the local currency at the current rate of exchange into dollars, and then you say on that basis that's the size of the economy. That's nominal GDP. Then there is the other way of calculating GDP, which is the one which is preferred, by the way, by the World Bank and the IMF, which is you look at purchasing power parity. You actually look at what the local currency can buy on the domestic market of the economy in question. Now, if you use nominal GDP, in other words, GDP calculated by exchange rates, then Russia's economy suddenly becomes quite small. However, if you use purchasing power parity, which is in fact not probably, it is the only valid statistical measure for measuring GDP, then not only is Russia's economy much bigger than those of Britain, France, and Italy, it's probably, as of this year or next year, going to be the biggest economy in Europe, overtaking Germany. My own view is the GDP anyway is a very crude measure. This is not, by the way, a conventional, this is not, by the way, this is a non-mainstream view. Many statisticians say this. The GDP is not the true measure of the size of an economy. If you actually look at the resources that an economy possesses, then of course, in that case, the Russian economy is actually an awful lot bigger even than that. It's difficult to compare economies, but Italy, Spain, Texas, all of these countries, Russia is far bigger than these economies.
The thing is too, is that, coming from the financial background for a short while, I mean, you can look at a company's traded stock, and the most common indicator is price to earnings. Okay, that's like that's like this. Okay, price to earnings, but that doesn't tell you anything about the company. It doesn't tell you anything about what they're doing, where they are in the marketplace. And GDP is like price to earnings. Okay, I don't take it very seriously either. Okay, because how many countries can put a man in space? Okay, how many countries can build nuclear reactors around the world? Okay. How many countries have very sophisticated military defense systems? And all these things. Does Texas do any of those things? Okay, really? I mean,
not by itself.
It's just a common slur. Okay,
Yes.
and it's done by people that don't know what they're talking about whatsoever. Okay, GDP doesn't tell you a whole lot. Okay, it tells you something, but it doesn't tell you anything about the nature and the quality and the potential of an economy.
Indeed. Can I just say, I mean, in my opinion, if you look at depth and range of resources, natural resources, size of population, industrial manufacturing,
debt,
science-based, stability of the financial system, ability to do things, I mean, to do all the things Peter said, have a space program, maintain an advanced military system, build icebreakers, develop space, big, cosmodromes in Siberia, build vast railways. There are only 3 economies in the world which have the ability to do the full range of those things. They're the US, China, and Russia. Germany cannot do all the things that Russia does. Russia can do everything that Germany does. That's the fundamental point to understand.
Peter, from Robert, Obama called Russia just a small gas station. Anything to add to the list that
I think it was
McCain. Kind of answered that question.
No, McCain said that, I think.
McCain said that. I think Obama, I think, also said that. I think they both. I think Obama added the small gas station.
No. What Obama said, Russia doesn't make anything.
Doesn't make anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's absolutely patently ridiculous. All right. No, I mean, again, I'll just repeat myself. These are just slurs to lash out at Russia from people that have no idea what they're talking about. Yes. I mean, I saw Samantha Power. I think she was on Rachel Maddow, and she was talking about everything Putin does is for his own personal gain, and I was horrified. I mean, here was someone that was the ambassador to the United Nations from the United States, and basically a cabinet level job in the Obama administration, and she had no idea what she was talking about. She was just talking out of her hat. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah. I mean, and a number of really people that I respect as Russia watchers were, on the one hand, aghast, but at the same time, what do you expect from people like that are so ideologically blinded? You have to remember, Samantha Power was the right to protect doctrine or originator, okay? Which means you can attack countries and flaunt international law. That's what it means, okay? That's what right to protect in her mind means, where it is just repackaged, okay? And, and she just came out with her memoirs. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace.
Yes.
She hardly mentions Yemen. That's yours, Samantha. That's yours. Yeah. That was your watch.
Yeah.
Right to protect. That was yours.
Yes.
No accountability. No self-reflection.
Yes.
Ridiculous.
I mean, Peter's absolutely right. Can I just say one quick thing about Russia and not making anything? Russia produces pretty much everything that it consumes. Its import bill is tiny. This isn't something that people widely understand. It is not a major importer of manufactured goods. Now, one of the great problems with all these memes about Russia having a smaller economy than, Holland or Italy or Spain or Texas or whatever, is that, of course, people repeat it so often that it, unfortunately, I think they start to believe it. and it distorts their own decision making because they continuously think, underestimate the kind of things that Russia can do. So when Russia intervened in Syria in 2015, nobody thought they'd be able to sustain it because Italy, Spain, Holland, all those countries could not have intervened in Syria in the way that Russia did and make the fundamental change to the situation there that the Russians achieved. And if you if you persist in these mythologies, you will lose all connection to reality and your decisions will go wrong.
But don't you think it's really kind of just paradoxical? Russia's a threat to the world. Russia is doing this. Russia's doing that. Well, okay, but I mean, how could Russia threaten the world if its economy is only the size of Texas? I mean, you can't have it both ways. No. You can't have it both ways.
Yes.
Even my good friend, parenthetically, good friend Tucker Carlson said, in Russia, there is not one escalator that works. Well, there's a lot of escalators that work. I'm on them every single day. Okay. I mean, either it's a terrible boogeyman that keeps you up at night, or it's just this rust bucket that's falling apart, and it will, you have a demographic crisis. They're all alcoholics. You can't have both narratives at the same time. But remarkably, people in the crazy world of like Max Boot, he seems to be able to kind of intertwine them. It doesn't make any sense, but in his world, it does.
All right, guys, since we're on Syria, let's continue with Syria. That's a topic that we want to cover. Before we do that, everybody who's on this live stream, if you haven't hit that like, do us a favor and hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed, do us a favor and please subscribe. They are unsubscribing a lot of people from our channel. Just yesterday, they unsubscribed about 128 people we saw in our dashboard. So check to see if you're subscribed, check to see if you're getting notifications, if you have that bell clicked. So
I didn't get a notification for this one. I didn't get one.
As we approach 2020, this is not a surprise to us. As we approach 2020, we were pretty much prepared for a lot more censorship to take place. So this doesn't surprise us at all. But we do need your help to continue to broadcast and to continue to do these shows. So please hit that like and share the channel with everybody you know. Of course, you can go to the Durant shop and pick up merchandise. And you can also donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. You'll see all those links in the description box down below. Alexander from Dieter Volke. Alexander, you have to redo the Baghdadi episode. Alexander, why do we have to redo the Baghdadi episode?
I know
there is a lot of talk that what happened really didn't happen. Get into it, Alexander.
Well, I wrote on Facebook. I think a lot of people saw it. It says that it seems that Baghdadi dies quite often on a regular basis.
Yes. Nonetheless, I think overall we were right, and I think he did indeed die in that raid. I would be very astonished if he didn't. And I have to say, if he didn't die in that raid, then ISIS, or what's left of it, would surely by now be coming forward and saying that he is actually alive and well, and we would be hearing something from him. So the fact that the United States says he died, I'm sure that he did die. The one big and really extraordinary, puzzling thing in some fashions is that the Russians, who Donald Trump thanked for their cooperation, the Russian military seem to be pushing very hard back on that. They seem to be saying, well, actually, we didn't help at all. We don't know what the Americans are talking about. It's something that we are completely bemused by.
Can I say something, Alexander, on that before I forget?
No.
Maybe I'm off base, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that was just stupid by the Russian military to make that statement.
Absolutely, completely.
I think that was a bad PR move.
It was a hugely bad PR move. My impression, by the way, was it was somebody in the Russian military has gone for a huge sulk because, as I said, the Americans got al-Baghdadi first. The Russians had argued that they killed him a year before, and I think they're angry about it. On the contrary, I agree. They should have capitalized on the fact that Donald Trump thank them for it. But that's my own personal view about this. I've no doubt that he's dead. I think our program, in essence, is right. I am sure that many of the details that Donald Trump provided will turn out to be factually wrong, as they were when Obama provided all kinds of details about Osama bin Laden's death, and it turned out that they were wrong. But we should not lose sight of the underlying fact, which is that al-Baghdadi is dead.
Peter, what do you make of what happened with Baghdadi? You said that he's died many, many times.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, okay.
I see the live chat. He's died more times than Sean Bean.
Okay, I'm not going to really throw myself into this here. My whole point is that we've heard him being killed in the past. Okay, and in seeing Donald Trump's victory lap, which I don't see anything wrong with it. He was severely criticized for it. I watched. I thought, let's just hit Trumpian style. That's fine. We've gotten used to it. He's not always on a first name basis with facts. We know that. Okay, that's baked in. I don't understand Russia's position. I mean, I'm not going to interrogate it. That's the position they came out with. The Russians are very, very angry with the oil grab in Syria, and I think that might be an underlining element right there. I mean, this is so grotesque, you guys. Yeah. I mean, and again, these stupid talking heads in media, you have very few people saying, this is extremely illegal under international law. I mean, not only are you there illegally, you were not invited there by the sovereign government in Damascus. Now you are gleefully talking about stealing the natural resources from another country. This is grotesque on an unbelievable magnitude for me. And it sickens me, because it's not denying ISIS the oil. It's denying the Damascus government the oil to rebuild their economy. Now, is it going to work? No, the Assad government has enough control over those resources inside the country that it gets its bare minimum requirements met. Okay, I mean, not a lot of extra. They have to be very careful with it. No international company is going to go in there, not at all. I mean, they get sued left, right, and center in courts all over the world. Oil companies are adverse to risk, everybody, and their shareholders are too. Okay, this is fantasy stuff. All it is that Lindsey Graham is able to convince Trump that somehow it'll pay for the war, which is ridiculous on its face. So, I mean, how are they going to get this oil out of it? Are they going to helicopter it out? Huh? I mean, every single aspect of this is ridiculous. And people in Western media report it with a straight face, again, because they have no idea what they're talking about.
I'm glad you mentioned the oil, Peter, because there's a lot of talk about the oil grab. And if it's a mafia move, it's like a gangster style move. In other words, a lot of people are saying, it's spiteful. It's a spiteful. That's my question. That's my question to you and Alexander. Try to make sense as to why this was done. Like, put yourselves in Trump's shoes or in the U.S.'s shoes. Why would they do such a move like this? I mean, they obviously know it's going to be hard to get the oil out. They know why they know the difficulties of keeping a force in Syria to protect this oil, quote unquote, protect this oil.
It's piracy. Why? It's piracy. Yeah.
But piracy for what reason, though?
Piracy. I call it piracy on the high desert. Okay. Go ahead, Alex. I've been talking.
I mean, just to make some sense out of why they're doing it, if we can add some sort of logic to it.
It's to stop Syria getting repossessing its own oil. The policy at the moment is to strangle Syria economically as part of this obsession that some people still have in the United States to try to engineer regime change there. There is no way that's going to happen. Regime change is completely off the agenda in Syria, but they are not reconciled to this. And they're clinging on to that strategy by trying
Who's clinging on? Because Alexander, if I can push back on both of you, I want to push back a little for both of you guys. If on the one hand, Trump is saying, I want to remove the forces from Syria. On the other hand, they want to strangle Syria. Has the policy shifted to the point where it's like a Venezuela type of policy, in that we're not going to intervene with the military, but we're going to strangle every country we disagree with economically?
That's part of it. But think about it. If you want to secure these oil fields illegally, you're going to have a military force to do it. I mean, so it's an excuse to keep troops there.
Yes.
They're not going to be exploiting the oil. They're not going to do that at all. The U.S. Army doesn't do that. Okay. That what they're doing is because their policy has failed, and they're looking for another option to somehow justify to themselves a reason to stay there until they can think of another reason to stay there. That's always what it's been. It's always been in search of a mission to stay there, and this surreal hope that somehow they'll be able to remove Assad, which is not going to happen.
No,
it's not going to happen at all. All it is denying Syria the ability to have control over its borders and to rebuild the country. And they don't want Western money right now. They don't want any strings attached now. Russia, Iran, particularly China, will go in there and rebuild the country. Okay, and there won't be a lot of conditionality, like remove the government. I'm sorry, Alexander, go ahead.
No,
keeping the door a little open, Alexander, in other words, correct?
Absolutely. But I mean, I also get one of the problems with the US and why this policy looks incoherent is because there is this constant tug of war between, I think, Donald Trump, who basically wants to get the troops out, and the bureaucracy, the Washington bureaucracy, the think tanks, the neocons, the media, the military, the CIA, all of these people who want to continue with the regime change policy. So Donald Trump makes this big move. He gets the US troops out of northeast Syria. He cuts a deal with Erdogan. He basically dumps the Kurds. Then there's this massive pushback against him. So he's in some political difficulties because of the impeachment proceedings. So he agrees with this policy of letting US troops continue to occupy the oil fields, because that will then, as he thinks, I think, take some of the heat off him. And at the same time, the people who've been pushing back, they still want to deprive Syria of its oil. This tug of war is going to go on right up through the entire political life of Donald Trump's presidency.
Yep.
Eventually, I have no doubt the US troops will withdraw, especially if Trump remains president. But this is why we get this 2 steps forward, 1 3/4 steps back,
over and over again. You know, it's interesting, and I don't want to put too much into this, but Alexander Mercouris is right. The impeachment is part of this calculation, because you have to remember, everyone, war is a bipartisan issue, okay? It's the only thing that is bipartisan in Washington is war and intervention, all right?
Yes.
That's the only thing that keeps them together.
Yeah.
And what Lindsey Graham, I'm only speculating here, pure speculation, but he whispered into Trump's ear, you're going to need all Republicans, maybe minus Mitt Romney, but you're going to need all of them in the Senate. Just, take that on board, Mr. President, which is basically a veiled threat.
Yes.
Because it is bipartisan, this intervention into Syria, which none of them understand at all.
No.
Okay. But it's a threat that Trump takes seriously, because this is going to go, he will be impeached. Okay. I truly believe that. He won't be removed, but and so he has this political circus around him. The last thing on his mind is, what is he going to do for the Kurds? He's not thinking about it, you guys. He's not. He's in a fight for political survival. And if they want to stay in Syria, then, what the heck? All right, fine.
Yes.
Alexander, let's move over then to the impeachment inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
He will be impeached, Peter says. You think he's going to be impeached? What do you make of this vote coming up tomorrow?
I don't think I'm absolutely sure that he will be impeached. I mean, the Democrats are now so deep into this that it's going to be impossible for them to draw back on it.
Yeah.
There will be an impeachment vote tomorrow. The vote that we're going to get tomorrow is a cack-handed admission by Pelosi and co. that what they've been doing up to now is a massive and grotesque violation of due process. They were becoming increasingly embarrassed by all of this, but so now they've had to accept that there's going to be a vote sooner or later, and they've decided to hold it now. I think they feel that they managed to squeeze quite a lot of publicity through this impeachment process that they've had up to now, and they're going to go for this impeachment vote tomorrow. I've no doubt it will carry. Of course it will, and I've no doubt also it will all end in the Senate, because as Peter absolutely rightly said at the beginning of this program, there is actually no there on this. There's nothing. There's one point Peter made, by the way, which I really want to just draw on, because people say that Shorkin, the Procurator General who was investigating, who sacked Joe Biden's instigation. And by the way, let's remember that's not disputed. Joe Biden himself has bragged about it. Shorkin was not, in fact, investigating Hunter Biden. He was investigating Burisma Holdings. This is an absolutely key point. Now, what do we see in this record? This record of this conversation. Peter is absolutely right. We have this record. Yesterday, we got this general who comes along, says, Colonel. He says there are all sorts of gaps in the transcript. I then looked at what these so-called gaps were. None of them are meaningful. None of them change.
One gap, he says, Alexander, is a meaningful gap. And that's where he says, they say the company in the transcript instead of explicitly saying Burisma. That's his big complaint. That one
a guy
footnote. Instead of saying Burisma, it says the company.
Yes. Said a guy with Ukrainian descent. Just saying.
Yes. But what relevance does that have? Apparently, there was problems with the voice recognition software. It struggled with the name Burisma Holdings, so they put the company instead. It doesn't actually alter the substance of that conversation. We look at this conversation, and there is nothing there. It is not this huge, sinister conversation.
At the end of the day, I'm sorry, we got to get out of the weeds here. No. Everything both of you have said is very important, but let's get out of the weeds and make it really very clear. He's the president of the United States. He has a right to conduct foreign policy as he so wishes. Okay, there is no evidence of personal corruption. Okay, there's none. No. Like I said, everyone, go and read the transcript. Yes. It's rambling, it's wandering. It's stream of consciousness. It's self-congratulatory. I mean, and then Zelensky is smoozing to him because he knows that Trump is pissed off with the Ukrainians for their involvement in the 2016 election on the behalf of Hillary Clinton, which we know for a fact. It's a public record. They have come forward. Okay. One thing I want to say, because it went through my mind and I don't want to forget it. You could have, and we could have a unique impeachment process. We have Andrew Johnson, we have Bill Clinton, of course Nixon, but we may have something unique happen here. The Supreme Court Chief Justice, which would be the judge in any trial in the Senate, it's not inconceivable that he will dismiss it out of hand. Yes, because he will say that there is no evidence of wrongdoing. There are no high crimes and misdemeanors as it is written about in the Constitution, as Hamilton envisioned it in the Federalist Papers. Yes. He might just say this is not worthy of the Supreme Court's judgment and throw it right back at them. Yes, and that could happen
easily.
Justice Roberts. Yeah.
Justice Roberts. Yeah. It could easily happen because Peter is absolutely right. It's the point he made right at the beginning of our live stream. There is no crime. There's no identified crime. There's no evidence.
Disagreeing with the president is not having the president disagree with you is not a crime.
No.
Okay.
No.
So they trot out this guy Vindman.
Yeah.
His problem is that he disagrees. One guy disagrees with the transcript of software and a bunch of other people
who
have transcribed it. He's upset because they're not taking his version of
Yes.
it. Exactly.
Yes.
So what? My question to both of you is that they trot out this decorated military guy. Of course, military people never lie.
No.
Never lie. They would never lie about WMDs.
Yes.
They would never lie about Libya. They would never
Yeah.
lie about Syria.
Yes.
They would never lie
And
unless
Colonel-
you're Tulsi Gabbard.
and Colonel what was that? Ollie North. I mean,
Yeah.
he isn't he the bastard?
Ollie
of
North
virtue?
never
Yes.
lied. He never lied. Tulsi Gabbard and Michael Flynn may be the exception to the rule, of course, right? So they trot him out. Was this deliberate? This was all planned. We never hear about the whistleblower anymore either.
Well, of course,
There's no
well,
whistleblower.
well, of
That
course-
guy's
well,
Yeah,
just
because they
disappeared.
know each other.
yes.
They know each other.
Yeah.
That's why.
Well, of course, because I mean, all of these people, let's be quite clear about this, are part of this whistleblower complaint. I mean, we've always said all along that the whistleblower is not one person, but many. It was obvious to me
It's Adam Schiff.
the moment I read it. But the point about it is, this person is grumbling about the fact that they didn't agree one of his amendments. The amendment is inconsequential. It
He
doesn't
has to-
change anything.
He has to be investigated because
Yeah.
he probably broke a secrecy law.
Yeah.
He should be investigated.
Yes.
What we really need, again,
Yeah.
how many times in one podcast do I have to mention my age? I remember the Church Commission
Yeah.
in the 1970s, okay, which had a review of the intelligence community from their inception in the late 40s all the way into the 70s. We need another one. We
Yes.
need new whistleblower laws. This is a gross violation and abuse of whistleblowing. When I think of John Kiriakou, who he lost his career, and probably impoverished him. He's had to reconstruct his life. God love him, because he's a really good man. He's on the pages of the American Conservative often. He's also over at Consortium News a lot, and he's over on Sputnik radio in the United States a lot. If you want to know what whistleblowing is all about, go to his writings, okay?
Yes.
And he wrote an article saying that this quote unquote whistleblower doesn't reach the standard of being a real whistleblower. And these people, again, I keep stressing, all of this stuff is destroying institutions and faith in institutions, okay? This is so reckless what they're doing. This is part of the coup against a duly elected president of the United States, irrespective of how you feel about Donald Trump. And God knows, everyone knows I have my complaints, but this is wrong. If you're going to impeach him, fine, do it right. Do it legally, do it transparently, and make sure impeachment, if you go back to the Federalist Papers, impeachment was a remedy that was bipartisan. Read it. It's in the Federalist Papers. Hamilton, I don't remember which one. But it has to be bipartisan, and it has to be, and I remember when Nixon resigned, there was bipartisanship, and there was the public opinion polls were for it. Everything, they got all of their ducks lined up, okay? Pelosi is doing this, I don't know what kind of dance this is. It's reckless, and it's going to backfire. It's going to backfire big time.
Yes. Can I just, Peter's absolutely right. Can I just say one thing about the whistleblower, the so-called whistleblower? He is not a whistleblower. He is a leaker. He leaked the classified conversation of the President of the United States with another world leader, which, as Peter absolutely rightly said, is the President conducting foreign policy. They're not supposed to leak those details of those conversations. And that's what he did, hiding behind the whistleblower protections in order to do something which is both inappropriate and grossly illegal.
And colluding with the Ukrainian government behind the back of the US government to ask to create a strategy to deal with Giuliani's inquiries. I mean, this guy is not only is he a leaker and he leaked illegally, he is colluding with a foreign government. Yeah. Okay, there we have a Hatch Act issue. Okay, a real one, a real Hatch Act issue. Yeah. I mean, they keep going, they keep bothering John Kerry for talking to the Iranians. I don't think that's a violation of the Hatch Act at all, okay? Because he's not representing, he has no political power, he has no official position. This so-called leaker, real leaker, he is a government employee, and he is conducting American foreign policy business behind the back of elected officials. That is a violation of the law. I'm not a lawyer, but that's what it seems to me.
Alexander, this is all about the coup in Ukraine in 2014. It's all about money and corruption.
Yeah,
going in there
and it's always. But if you look at the media, it only goes back to 2016. They never go back to 2014.
That's my. If you had ever, that's exactly my point, Peter. If you have ever, who would have ever thought that coup, that Maidan event, would still be talked about today, or would lead up
to cancer.
What we have today.
It's a cancer.
And at the end of the day, guys, wasn't this just all about going back to the IMF and bringing everything full circle? This was all just a very sophisticated robbery.
Well, it was that. It was also a major geopolitical play, and it has been a disaster in every respect.
That's a side benefit, though. I mean, I think to these guys, to these globalists, Alexander, and then you could explain. I want you to bring this full circle, Alexander. But my one comment on that is I think that's kind of like, that's an added benefit. This is also a geopolitical play, guys. But you know what? I think they're all saying to themselves, Biden's and all these guys, we're going to make a lot of money. Look,
they looted the place.
And they were probably like, oh boy,
loot.
This is going to be a big payday when we get this Maidan thing rolling.
And it was.
And it was. Absolutely. They made, apparently lots of people from the United States went to Ukraine. The finance minister.
Paul Manafort.
but the finance minister of Ukraine, Madame Yaresko, is American for a long time, and she was in Ukraine. So all kinds of people came to Ukraine. They were all going to clean up Ukraine.
Lithuanians, Georgians, Canadians, Americans.
Absolutely. They were all going to Ukraine. And the results of all their help, and all their help to clean up Ukraine of corruption, is that corruption is worse than it's ever been. Ukraine is the poorest country in Europe, as Peter says, competing with Moldova for that honor. And all sorts of people in the United States seem to have made themselves an awful lot of money along the way. And we see that it's all coming back to the United States. Can I come back? A point we've made many times on various programs we've done for the Duran. Between 2014 and 2018, Ukraine received $45 billion. Where is it? What's it done? What's become of it?
The Caymans, the Bahamas, Swiss banks, Bank of England.
I mean that's more than $10 billion a year. It also had its debt restructured. What became of all of this?
What became of all of it? I agree. No one talks about it.
No.
Never happened.
No, never happened. Exactly. I mean,
at a time, Alexander, where they were imposing austerity on all of Southern Europe.
Absolutely. Yes.
They were indebting us for 50 to 100 years, putting us in debt.
Yes.
And they broke their own rules by the IMF broke its own rules by giving money to Ukraine when it wouldn't to Greece.
Well, yeah.
Back to the IMF.
And when Ukraine was also in default, but that's, it broke all its own rules. Ukraine was in a state of war, Ukraine was in default, and still they shoveled money at it. And
now they're going to impeach a president.
And they're going to impeach a president because the president wants to find out what actually happened.
Well, the interesting thing is that you had the Harvard boys in Moscow in the 1990s with their shock therapy and forcing Yeltsin to do things against the national interest. They just refitted themselves and did it in Ukraine. Yes. Okay, same thing.
Yes,
unbelievable. What do you guys say? We do some super chats.
Yes.
Wrap it up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, I got 20% left on my phone.
All right,
so
let's do it. Let's do it. Alexander from Penguins fan. Sweden has been on decline since Olof Palme assassination.
I've heard many people say that, including many people who are Swedish, that it never really, it's been on the slide ever since. The political system's become increasingly unresponsive and unstable, and that the so-called Swedish economic success of the last few years is based on a completely unsustainable financial and credit boom. This is what I've been hearing.
All right,
I think
Peter.
that's right.
Okay, Peter from Penguins fan, super chat. Does Russia have coal mines?
Of course it does. Yes, it has a large coal industry.
Mm.
There's a lot of restructuring of it here. I mean, it's interesting that that question was asked because I was having lunch with Dima Babic after Crosstalk on Sunday, and I asked him. I said, "What was air pollution like during the Soviet Union?" He said, "There was a lot of air pollution in Moscow, but there's virtually none at all in Moscow." And Russia has everything it possibly needs. It has a lot of natural gas, and so they've converted everything as much as they can to natural gas.
Yes.
It burns cleaner. So,
Yes.
In some of the trips I've taken across the country, you can smell coal, the soot in the air in some regions and stuff like that where they still use it. But it's the primary choice for energy use is natural gas.
Absolutely. The contrast between the air conditions in Moscow and air conditions in somewhere like Shanghai is extraordinary. And that is precisely because of what Peter said. They use natural gas in Russia rather than coal, as they still heavily do in China.
All right,
and Ukraine.
And Ukraine.
Alexander from Penguins fan, U.S. stealing Syria oil. What will Syria do?
Well, very good question. I think not just Syria. I suspect Russia, Turkey, all of these countries, they do not want to see the United States there. What I think they're going to do is that they will act, as they always do, the Russians always act slowly and incrementally. They will gradually isolate these few hundred men with their tanks that are occupying these oil fields, and gradually the position will become untenable. That is what I predict.
This is a short gap thing. I mean, this was just so thoughtlessly worked out. I mean, it's a level of buffoonery that you didn't think we'd come to, but we have. Okay, this is just smoke and mirrors. It's not about oil. It's like they're desperate to find a better solution because we can't leave. Of course, we can never leave, ever leave.
No.
Peter from Toilet Sauce, 10 euro super chat. Peter, the reason the West can say those contradictory things about Russia is because the West is not only suffering from Russophobia, but also Russophrenia. Russophrenia.
What's phrenia? I don't know what that means.
Fear.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Russophobia, Russophrenia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's because they don't have answers to their own problems. That's what it is. Okay. I mean, I did a crosstalk on Russian conservatism with Professor Alexander Mikiris was on that program. It was a wonderful. I so enjoyed doing that program because I come from an academic background, and Professor Robertson is a brilliant guy. And one of the things we brought up in the program that I think needs to be talked about more. It's the fact that Russia will not embrace "quote unquote" liberal values as defined by the West. It is a conservative country, by and large, a conservative country, and
like schizophrenia, Peter, like schizophrenia from university.
Thing is that's one of the reasons why Russia is demonized, is because it won't do what it's supposed to do. You lost the Cold War, "quote unquote." That's the narrative. No, Russia opted out of the Cold War. It didn't lose the Cold War. It opted out of it, and it has gone down its own path, a path that is not threatening. Certainly, Russia does not want to export its model, if there is such a model. I mean, I kind of regret that. I lament that. I think it should be have a sovereign definition of what Russia should be. It's still vague. Okay,
yes.
Maybe that's done intentionally, not to alienate people, because I had some people visiting me from Greece about a month ago, and they were asking me about the political right here. And I said, well, I mean, the political right, ethno-nationalism. I said, ethno-nationalism could never work in Russia. I mean, there's too many people are mixed. I mean, you can't have Russia for Russians. Well, you could have a lot of people of different ethnic groups that identify as being Russian. It won't work.
No.
It won't work here because you can't do it on color either. Okay. So, I mean, so many of the phenomena that the West sees happening and the solutions that they have for those problems don't apply everywhere in the world. And that is something that befuddles them because it ideologically does not compute to them. All right. And I have people visiting me all of the time from various countries around the world. And I'll right down the street, there are three Mormon guys on their mission here. Okay. And then one of them has been here for almost 2 years. And, I bumped into him in the metro and I just said, well, what did you expect? And what have you learned? And he said, everything they told me wasn't true. He said, it's a very nice place to live. People are nice. People getting along with their lives. This misperceptions. It's more about problems in the psyche of ideologically possessed people in the West, and not about problems here. It's all in their head. It's in their head.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, University of Dice, for pointing out schizophrenia with Russophrenia. Alexander, you want to say something?
Yes, I think the other thing is that, of course, Peter's points about Russia and many of the points we've discussed, if people visited Russia more and learned Russian, a lot of these deceptions would not be possible. One of the major things that was really, I thought, very enlightening was this extraordinary campaign the British government ran last year to dissuade Britons from going to Russia during the World
Cup.
And of course, when they did go, and of course, the sports pages in our newspapers and our media are less heavily policed by the thought police than some of the other parts are. I mean, people were coming back with glowing comments.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I met an Australian girl that's actually studying here now.
Yeah.
And I was telling her about what it was like in the streets of Moscow during the World Cup. And she said, weren't there a lot of people angry about how much they invested into it? Because there's so many places that did around the world having Olympic villages and all that, and they go into disrepair. And I said, no, they did a really good job of making sure to be dual use. And so they are. I mean, I will be moving in about 2 weeks to my new apartment. And in my neighborhood, I can see it from my window, is a Spartak brand new stadium. And I mean, it is state of the art. It's amazing. All right. Yes. And it's being used all of the time. So when the Russians, when they were investing for the World Cup, and there were a lot of people in Russia that were against it because they thought it should be spent on other things. It was a highly contested subject, but they made sure that it would have use afterwards, and they do. And for those that want to come and visit, because of the World Cup, everything is in English now. Russian, English, Russian, English, Russian, English. Everything is now. You can get around. Before it was not that easy. Now you can.
All right. From GEC 11112, a $10 Australian dollar super chat. Thanks, guys. Thank you for that super chat, GEC. From John Huber, $5 Canadian super chat. When DSM-6 comes out, it will have to include Trump and Putin derangement syndromes. Probably it's going to have to include it. That's for sure. I'm starting to believe that there really are syndromes. Trump
but the interesting thing is, though, since the 2016 presidential election, is that we have kind of an interesting shift. Is that before everything was Putin's fault, now everything is Trump's fault. Have you noticed that? There's a competition whose fault it is. Okay, when you're asking who's at fault, it means you are at fault by definition. If you're looking for fault in others, it's your fault.
Yeah,
right. Well said. Alexander from Penguins fan, why not put multiple S-400s on alert in Syria where the US are stationed?
I think the S-400s in Syria are on alert. I understand that for some time now, I think since 2017, Russian air defense radars now routinely track the movements of US aircraft. So there is a very careful balance.
And Israeli.
And Israeli, exactly. I think one of the things to say about the Russians in Syria is that one of their methods has been not to look for obvious confrontations, but to build up their strength in Syria incrementally. So we first saw them move in 2015 with a small number of aircraft. Then they brought in more air defense systems. Then they brought in S-400 systems. Then they reinforced those S-400 systems with more S-400 systems. Then they brought in Panzer short-range systems. Then they provided the Syrians with S-300s, which apparently are to some extent under Russian control. Then you see steady build-up there, which I think has been increasingly constraining what the US and other countries like Turkey have been doing. So I think that is to a great extent already happening, actually. And one of the reasons why I don't expect these US troops to stay there for very long is because the military environment, largely because of the Russians, has become so hostile to them.
All right, Peter from Sparky, could protecting the oil be a meaningless excuse to keep in U.S. involvement to placate the military-industrial complex, if only temporary?
Oh, of course, that's very obvious. Yeah, I think that's part of it here. I think they're just looking for, searching for a reason. I mean, and this one played so easily to Trump's ears, because if you look at Trump over Twitter way before he was president, he was always talking about how the Iraqis should pay for the war, and steal their oil. It's not a new idea. I mean, somebody said, hey, Trump liked this idea when it came to Iraq. Maybe we could sell it to him with Syria, and it worked temporarily. Temporarily.
Yes.
All right, Alexander.
Okay, and thinking that, you know, that they're going to try to placate the Kurds by giving them the oil. I mean, again, that's another just pipe dream. Sorry, but it's just ridiculous.
Yes.
Yeah, that was ridiculous. Yeah. From Penguins fan Alexander, Trump wants ExxonMobil in Syria. Why would they go there when there's not much oil there compared to Iraq or Saudi Arabia?
No way.
No, I think we shouldn't take any of that seriously, because there's no way. Peter's absolutely right. ExxonMobil are never going to go to Syria. They're quite right. There is not enough oil in Syria to go there to make it worthwhile. And in a country like that, no oil company, no American oil company is even ever going to dream of going there.
All right, Peter from Sparky, great point on Senate Republicans using impeachment as leverage against Trump. At least half of the Senate and House Republicans are closet anti-Trumpers.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's why Trump over the last 10 days have been naming and shaming Republicans. I mean, he wants them, demanding them to circle the wagons for the next assault against him. Okay. It's much bigger than Trump. You know, I really get tired of talking about Trump, because I want to look at, I'm a person of ideas, and I worry about the erosion of institutions. And this blind hatred for Trump is a dangerous dead end. And I just don't know if we can pick up the pieces afterwards. Having said that, Donald Trump has changed American politics forever. You put Biden in there, we're not going to have Obama light. No, we're not. Okay. And those that think that's true don't know what they're talking about. And because they don't know what they're talking about, they're on cable news all day.
Peter, real quid pro quo, isn't it? You stay in Syria, we'll support you in the impeachment inquiry. There's your quid pro quo.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, you know, seriously, everyone. I got 10% now. Okay. With Trump's conversations with Zelensky, so they're trying to, the political left is trying to convince me, and the intelligence community is trying to convince me, and Adam Schiff is trying to convince me that presidents have never talked that way to foreign leaders.
No.
Oh, come on. Come on. I mean, it's legend now how Bush Jr. worked the phones to cajole, blackmail, threaten, everything in the book to get countries to support the war in Iraq, you know, the invasion of it here. I mean, so Donald Trump is just saying, you know, hey, what the hell happened in 2016? And it looks like it's kind of coming from your country. I mean, he's the first person to want to know what happened. Yes. Okay. I mean, he has a right to know what happened.
Yes.
I think we all have a right. We've
Absolutely.
gone through this for 3 years. I want to know what happened, and I want people to be punished for it. Okay. I mean, Flynn is life is on the line here. I mean, and he could die in prison, and he got caught in a process crime. But the Bidens and the Clappers and the Comeys, all the McCabe's, the Strucks. I mean, they did far, far worse, real criminality, and they're going to get a free pass. Yeah, I want to know what happened.
Yes.
Alexander from Sparky Super Chat. President Trump asked on the phone call, do me a favor to Zelensky. A favor by definition is not quid pro quo.
Well, in a sense, yes, because of course,
particularly since nothing happened.
Well, indeed. I mean, this is the point, which is, of course, I mean, there's talk about all this military aid. The military aid was supplied, and these investigations that are supposedly being mooted at least they haven't been announced. They haven't taken place. So, I mean, there is no quid pro quo. I don't see one. At least not in that call. Absolutely. I mean, Giuliani may have been doing all kinds of other things. Yeah, but, we're not impeaching. We're not impeaching Giuliani.
But that's a good point, and I think that I have to wonder if Rudy overstepped his bounds. Yeah. I'm just saying, yeah. But I mean, it's what we call in media. He gets a little star sick. Yeah. I mean, Alexander Christopher. I think you and I had a short conversation after one of his last appearances on Laura Ingraham. I think you and I were just struck. It's like, oh my God, he's saying more and more and more. Yes. I mean, she was almost got to the point of cautioning him. Maybe you shouldn't say that.
Yes.
So I think we'll hear more about Rudy's. Look, everybody has their adventure in Ukraine. Okay, everybody does.
Yes, yeah, that's for sure. Sparky. Super chat $5. Peter, famed forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Batten, who observed the autopsy, just said broken bones indicate Epstein's death was more likely a homicide. I just read that too, right before.
I did too. Yeah. I did too. I mean, I'm not a forensic pathologist. I don't know. All I will say is there's a huge amount of unanswered questions about how Epstein died. Or came to die, or is alleged to have come to die, and there's been no answers. I was expecting that there would be a proper investigation. There's no sign of an investigation, and the story has gone dead. And I'm sad to say, I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised by it at all. No. I mean, look, the Ukraine Gate came up as fast as Epstein's case went down.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, look, too many people. It's just a very inconvenient story for so many people, yes. And we'll never really know the truth. And it really is a strike against justice. Okay, yes. When you have this kind of thing happen, and yes. And if you're caught with an ounce of marijuana in your pocket, you could face jail time. But no, yes. You can commit some horrific crimes in broad daylight, apparently, yes. With so many people around, and there's no accountability. Institutions are being eroded.
Yes.
This
looks like your dog has a really nice couch.
Yeah.
He certainly does. He certainly does. Yeah.
This falls on Barr though, the Epstein thing.
Yeah.
Barr said he's going to look into it. He said he's going to get to the truth.
Well,
obviously not the case.
We will see.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't look like it's going to be the case. So that falls on Barr. Anyway, from Moondragon, a question for the Oracle. In your view, where is Russia, China, Iran, and Syria 50 years from now? Keep up the good work, guys.
50 years is a very long time into the future. I predict that both Russia and China will still be friends in 50 years, and we're an awful lot richer than they are now. I also think, quite likely, Iran will be increasingly drawn into the economic and political systems of Eurasia that we're talking about, and which we are seeing forming. Where Syria will be, I don't know, because the Arab world is slightly apart from all of this, and trying to predict the future of the Arab world is extremely difficult.
Yep, and considering the world is awash with oil, the importance of the Middle East is turning into a geopolitical backwater. It really is. And we started out the program with the poor governance, this, it's a grim future for that region, I have to say. I mean, and when you think about the promise it had, so much wealth, so much of it was squandered, and so much potential squandered.
Yes.
And outside forces going right back to Sykes-Picot all the way to the present.
Yes.
All right, Peter from Penguins fan. Trump is weak. The guy removed troops from Syria, then redeployed them. He is a flip-flopper like Mitt Romney, and just like his predecessor, Obama.
Yeah, I mean, we've been asking this fundamental question for the entire time of his administration. Is he in charge of his foreign policy? And I'm sorry, to date, he is not.
No.
What's really pathetic is that, if it's put ourselves into Trump's shoes, okay? Let's just try to do that. He wants a foreign policy success, and he knows his base likes these things, okay? I mean, Tulsi Gabbard got into the headlines for saying what a lot of people think, and that people voted in 2016. I mean, I'll be honest with you guys. I was honest with my viewers on Crosstalk. The only reason at all that I took an interest in Donald Trump's candidacy is because of what he said about foreign policy, not because of anything else. And a lot of people felt that way. And a lot of people are really disappointed that he can't act presidential and get his agenda done. And he showed weakness, and this is what his detractors say, is that you're making America look weak. No, it's the quote unquote the adults around him that are making America look weak and indecisive, and hurts the prestige of the United States all over the world, particularly in the Middle East.
All right, Alexander from Penguins fan. The situation in the EU right now financially and politically, is the EU sanctions on Russia be lifted soon?
No.
Lifted, since the EU is hurting badly.
Well, no, I mean, the inertia that seems to be keeping these sanctions in place doesn't seem to be going away. I think that you would need to see decisive political leadership in the EU to actually make a decision to lift the sanctions, and that's nowhere in sight. And I think the Russians are absolutely happy about that, because from their point of view, the sanctions have actually helped them. I say this many times. People don't want to understand this or recognize the implications of this. But I mean, over the period when Russia has been under sanctions, its industries have grown, its agriculture has developed, its inflation rate has fallen, its reserves, its financial reserves have increased. The central bank, the Russian central bank, was able last week to reduce interest rates by 50 base points, which is a major step for it to make. So from the Russian point of view, these sanctions are a useful thing. They are a good thing. And I think for the EU, unfortunately, though they are a bad thing, they don't seem to be able to break with them.
Yeah.
All right. Super chat from Elaine. Do Alexander and Peter think Trump can go on keeping the mad, spiteful neocons and media from pressing for oil theft and regime change in Syria?
Well, the trouble is, I don't think that Trump, and this is, I think, where the point that Peter's been making, has ever coherently developed an alternative policy. He's never come together and explained why he doesn't support these regime change wars in a consistent way. He changes his position too often, and he appoints people like John Bolton, who of course is now apparently teaming up with the Democrats against him. So this is the problem with Donald Trump. He has never really managed to put this whole anti-interventionist policy together coherently. And of course, he's taking on an enormously powerful force in the pro-interventionists who captured US control of US foreign policy many decades ago and are very entrenched right across the bureaucracy, the think tanks, in Congress, and the media landscape.
Yep.
Peter, anything to add on that?
No, absolutely. I agree. Is it going to be, will it make the difference in 2020? Probably not, because we've seen it because it's the bureaucracy and the media are so much in collusion about the kind of the direction they want of American foreign policy. We all know, I mean, I've gone through, Alexander, Christopher, you lived in the United States for a long time. At the end of the day, elections are about bread and butter issues. Okay. Yes. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I mean, Ronald Reagan really just nailed it. Okay. And that's what it's going to be now. Yeah. I mean, if the economy remains buoyant, and he doesn't get himself into a major scrap like with Iran or something like that, or North Korea, he will be reelected.
Yes.
I mean, he has no, his opponents in the Democratic Party are pathetic. I mean, really pathetic.
Yes.
And
did we lose Peter?
I think we did. I think we did. Shall we press on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's wrap up the super chats. I think he'll come back. He's probably got like 5% battery left or something.
Yes.
With the battery on his phone. Anyway. All right. Let's go to Anthony Douglas Alexander super chat. Are we going back to a multipolar world?
Yes, I think we are. I mean, to be precise, I think the world we have at the moment is bipolar, as it was during the Cold War. You have the United States and its allies, and you have on the one side, and you have China and Russia on the other. And those are the two big opposing poles. And of course, within that system, you also have various other countries like India, like Brazil, perhaps possibly, that are maneuvering for position at various times. But the two big centers of power are the ones that I said. And the period of complete US dominance that began with the end of the Cold War, I think that's well and truly finished.
All right. It looks like Peter is off the stream. Yeah. Hopefully he'll get back on. He'll recharge his phone and get back on. From Sparky Alexander, $5 super chat. It's easier for people to learn what to think rather than how to think.
Well, that's very true. That's absolutely
ask
so.
For themselves is like asking them to run laps.
Well, indeed, it is. I mean, it is easier, but I would say, of course, that ultimately, if you want to understand what's going on in the world and you learn to think, you gain so much. You have a much better understanding of what's going on around you, and that empowers you and makes you stronger. So, I mean, it's easier not to think. It's better to think.
All right. Let's continue to go through the super chats, and hopefully Peter gets back on the live stream. Until then, Alexander, these all go to you. From Penguins fan, quick update. Denmark approves Nord Stream 2.
Oh, and I didn't see that. That's interesting.
I think that might be a question. I don't think that's.
It's a question.
I know Denmark's approved their own pipeline.
Oh, well, I know, yes.
To go down there, obviously.
Well, they're dragging their feet as long as possible. I think eventually they will approve it, because I think the Germans will be having all sorts of quiet words with them. And I think the Germans do want to see Nord Stream 2 done. But if they don't, then the Russians will take the other route, and it will take longer, but they will get this pipeline done. What the Russians and the Germans both want tends to happen.
Yeah, guys, I think Peter is going to just give his phone some more juice, and he'll get back on. Hopefully he'll get back on. Alexander, from Penguins fan, what is Erdogan up to now? Update on Idlib, Syria.
Well, indeed. As I understand it, I say as I understand it, I mean, what I am hearing is that as part of these very prolonged and complicated negotiations that took place in Sochi, Erdogan has basically green-lighted a further advance by the Syrians in Idlib. And I think that we will probably be seeing that over the next few weeks. It's not been widely commented upon, but there's actually been a very, very great escalation of Russian air activity over Idlib. And I think this business of the United States having to get permission to carry out this raid was partly a reflection of that the Russians have been much more active in the skies over Idlib over the last few weeks, over the last few days, than people have noted. And that's usually a sign that there will be more advances on the ground. I would add, it's not easy. There was a Syrian military advance, I don't think in Idlib itself, but in northern Latakia province, and they were trying to capture an important jihadi-controlled town there, and they captured some high ground near that town, and then they were pushed back because some of these jihadi fighters are very, very tough fighters. But I know eventually, I've no doubt that it will continue, and I still think that by the end of the year you'll see most of Idlib province, or indeed possibly even all of Idlib province, perhaps under Syrian government control.
All right, Alexander from Penguins fan update on the Arctic. What's going on there in Kaliningrad, where Poland and NATO provoking Russia?
These are two, of course, different places. I mean, Kaliningrad is this Russian enclave in the Baltic Sea. There is no, I think, genuine danger to Kaliningrad because it is a very well defended region. But obviously there are constant provocations and constant threats to it, which of course keep the Russian military in that area very, very much on its toes. I think it's something that could go seriously wrong one day. But I think at the moment it is under control. The Arctic is a different thing because the Russians have been building up and developing their position in the Arctic. And what is now happening is that the United States seems to be trying to challenge Russian positions in the Arctic. And there's even been talk of the United States actually sending its fleet on some kind of maneuvers in the Arctic along the Northern Sea route, which Russia claims is this Northern Sea route, is this sea route along Russia's northern coastline, Arctic coastline. Now that would be an incredibly provocative and dangerous thing to do. It's also logistically and technologically a very foolish thing to do because the US Navy isn't really adapted, its warships are not really adapted for operating in those waters. And of course, as I understand it, the Russians have recently been installing surface-to-air missiles and anti-ship missiles in various choke points along their coastline, which could potentially be used in a way to trap US fleets, US ships if they go there. So, we are looking at a very dangerous game of cat and mouse between the Americans and the Russians in an area where which the Russians consider of vital interest to themselves economically and in every other respect, and where the United States really has no such comparable interests. So I do hope that some people in Washington calm down and recognize that this is an area where the United States really should not be acting against the Russians, but should be, if you like, working with them. I mean, that's a very dangerous game that they're playing there. So I regard this talk of US fleets in the Arctic as far more dangerous than what is happening in Kaliningrad.
All right, from Reuters, MS says in the live chat, Reuters, Denmark clears major hurdle for Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline.
Well, there you go. So that is the last part of it, in which case, as I said, we should probably see Nord Stream 2 in full operation at the start of next year.
All right, thank you, MS, for that news update. From Sparky, if Tulsi Gabbard does well, it will give Trump the courage of his convictions against the military-industrial complex and the deep state's wishes.
I entirely agree.
Yeah, that's true. And thank you for that super chat, Sparky, and thank you for that that point. We agree with you there. Edward Turner, super chat. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Edward, for that super chat as well. And from Sparky, rather than draining the swamp, President Trump has continuously surrounded himself with treacherous advisors and deep staters. Swamp is deep.
Indeed so. That's exactly right.
Agree with that as well.
Totally agree. And as I said, we see this with John Bolton, who undermined his foreign policy, got sacked quite appropriately, and is now teaming up with the Democrats in order to help them with the impeachment proceedings. I mean, what a disastrous decision to appoint him national security advisor that was.
Trump's biggest problem is his HR.
Absolutely.
Biggest problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the final super chat, Alexander, is from Love, South France. No question, just 5 Swiss francs, I believe.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Love,
Yeah.
South France. And that is it. We've cleared out all the super chats, Alexander. I'm chatting with Peter as well, and I think Peter said he's trying to charge up his phone, but I told him we'll knock out the super chats and we will sign off. We just got one more from Acid Jazz. Alexander, Lieutenant Colonel Windman. True News tracked his ties to Ukraine yesterday.
Yes.
The Rhino neocon war thing. The war profiteers would win massively.
Yes.
So he would. Interesting. So he will as well, obviously. Obviously, it's a neocon.
Obviously, I mean, one of the stories, one of the sort of threads in this whole business of Ukraine Gate is you see this major pushback by all these various people on the ground in Ukraine, like Bill Taylor also, who want a particular US policy, an aggressive US policy, supporting Ukraine against Russia. And they're clearly concerned.
Support them for what? So they could go to war with Russia?
Well, essentially, yes. I mean, they see Ukraine as this great battleground with Russia, like we see them in Syria. It's the same kind of mentality with Syria. And they don't like the fact that Donald Trump doesn't seem to be interested in all of that and is looking to do other things with the Ukrainians. And they're pushing back on this. This is another major subplot in this story, a fundamental, if you like, policy disagreement and an attempt, once again, to undermine Trump's foreign policy, exactly as Peter said.
Alexander, is it true, and I think it is true, that the whole thing about the aid was not even aid? The Javelin missiles weren't even part of the aid package, were they? That was actually a military.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. That's exactly what I've heard. Also, and of course, let's come back to this. Obama refused to provide military aid to Ukraine.
All right. Let's see. We have a couple more super chats.
Oh,
Sparky
right.
says,
Okay.
Did you miss my super chat about Pompeo? I think we did, Sparky.
Right. Okay.
I'm looking for that. Until I find that super chat, we have another one from Penguins fan. Who is advising Trump on Russia? Love to see Professor Cohen advised him.
Well, indeed.
So, Alexander, handle that super chat. I'm going to look for your super chat, Sparky, on Pompeo.
Stephen Cohen would make a wonderful advisor for Donald Trump. But of course, Stephen Cohen, Professor Stephen Cohen, perhaps the United States' most eminent Russianist, a person who I remember at university I used to follow, and who has previously advised previous US administrations, including during the Cold War, has now been almost entirely frozen out of the political system in Washington. I mean, they don't listen to him anymore. Instead, they listen to people like Fiona Hill, who is a very, very strong and very, opponent of the Russian government, and very, very hostile to Russia, and someone who always looks for confrontation. And surprise, surprise, she's another person who comes along and gives evidence to the Democrats in their impeachment inquiry.
Yeah, Sparky, if you can just post that super chat in the regular chat on Pompeo, I'll get to that. But I think there's a super chat that Sparky asked, which we didn't get to, Alexander, which I see right now, which is white collar crime defense attorneys are out of work in the USA and around the world because white collar looting and other crimes are ignored by DAs.
Well, essentially,
right down your alley, Alexander.
Well, I'm going to say, I mean, I actually know some white collar defense lawyers and in London, and they're pretty good, and they're extremely capable, and they're not out of work. But by and large, it's a good example, this business of stealing money. It reminds me of a story of a play by Bertolt Brecht, when a group of criminals say, you know, why are we foolishly stealing banks and getting labeled criminals? Whereas if we set up a bank and we can steal from people, we will be considered eminent pillars of society. And the same is happening. A lot of what we see going around the world is exactly that. We see people stealing on huge amounts, on an enormous scale, and it is not being looked at, it is not being prosecuted, and the people who are involved in doing it are being protected.
All right, I'm still waiting for Sparky to put that Pompeo question again in the regular chat, but here's another super chat, Alexander, as we wait for that Pompeo question from Toilet Sauce. Are the US going to rent Russian icebreakers to do such a maneuver?
Is the US going to,
for the Arctic, yeah.
Yeah, Russian icebreakers operate in the Arctic, and Russia has a very strong and powerful Arctic fleet with advanced modern icebreakers, some of them nuclear powered. The United States has only 2 icebreakers, both of which are quite old, and one of which I believe belongs to the Coast Guard. The US there is absolutely no competition between the US and Russia in icebreaker capabilities. The Russians are far ahead of the United States in this field. I understand, by the way, the Chinese, who are teaming up with the Russians, with the Russians' agreement, are also building their own nuclear icebreakers, and they're building 3 of them.
All right, here's Sparky actually sent the Pompeo question again as a super chat, so thank you very, very much, Sparky, for that. And here's the question, Alexander, the Pompeo question. It was about Pompeo keeping President Trump from helping Assange. Pompeo and Haspel must go.
Well, absolutely. I'm entirely in agreement with that. I mean, Pompeo is the person who created the whole basis of the American case against Assange by saying that Assange is not entitled to First Amendment protections because he's not actually a journalist, but the head of an intelligence agency. WikiLeaks supposedly is an intelligence agency, not a media outlet at all. Pompeo actually said that to the CIA. And if you read the indictment that the United States has issued against Assange, that formulation that Assange is the head of an intelligence agency is in the first line of the indictment. Now, I think that is a crazy theory. And Pompeo, having come up with it, I mean, it's an excellent reason for getting rid of him and for not having him as Secretary of State. And as for Haspel, the current CIA chief, well, we had this very strange story a couple of months ago of how she apparently misled Donald Trump into supporting sanctions against Russia over the Skripal affair and expelling all kinds of Russian diplomats by making up stories and showing Trump false information, suggesting that children had been poisoned in Salisbury during the Skripal attack, which simply wasn't true. So yes, I think she should go also. And apparently she has a very bad record going back, so I've heard, involving, you know, all these things that were called enhanced interrogation techniques. I don't think she should ever have been appointed to head the CIA at all.
And Sparky says in the chat, Pompeo is responsible for Gina Haspel and Trump not coming to Assange's aid.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the chat, Alexander, are saying that Trump will not come to Assange's aid.
I'm afraid I agree. I don't think
things
Donald
do not look good for Assange.
No, they don't look good for Assange at all. I should say that I'm now in regular contact with all sorts of people who are involved in Assange's defense. And so I'm pretty well informed about the situation there, and they're not looking good in any way. And I think recently Alex and I covered the last court hearing at which Assange appeared, and it was extremely shocking and very disturbing and very concerning about Assange's future.
from Sparky. 2 more super chats just came in, Alexander. During the campaign, Pompeo liked WikiLeaks. Trump definitely mentioned WikiLeaks many times. Pompeo, I don't think he made a comment on WikiLeaks.
No, I agree with that. But I mean, they said favorable things about WikiLeaks then, and they're going after Assange, and they're going to try and bring him to the United States.
I didn't like that in the Oval Office. I think it was like 3 or 6 months ago when they asked Trump about WikiLeaks, and he kind of just said, I don't know. I didn't say anything about them. Trump on the campaign trail said many favorable things about WikiLeaks. That's it's on video.
Exactly.
That was not cool.
No.
But anyway, all right. From David Distang, in my opinion, Trump is on a leash, always was. His financial backers have him captured, but don't want to overplay their hand, knowing how emotional he is.
Well, maybe. I mean, I don't. I mean, there is all sorts of people like, what's his name, Adelson, the casino magnate, and all sorts of other people who supported him. And no doubt he has to take into account a lot of the things that they say, and that's probably true. I do think, though, that he has come under more opposition, coming from more opposition from the political and media class in the United States than any other president I can remember. I mean, they fought him every inch of the way, and they've been planning his impeachment since before he was inaugurated.
All right, from Penguins fan, another super chat just came in. Recently, OPCW leaks shows gas attacks in Duma was a setup.
This is an enormously big story, and it's perhaps one we should cover in a specific video. I think what this is referring to is a meeting between Jonathan Steele, who is an exceptional journalist in Britain, formerly, I think he was the foreign editor of The Guardian, when The Guardian was still a very, very reputable newspaper. And apparently he met with somebody who works at the OPC, in the OPCW, and this person has exposed multiple problems with the entire way in which the investigation into Duma, into the Duma alleged chemical attack was carried out. And of course, this comes shortly after the Courage Foundation published another report about the OPCW's investigation of the Duma incident. And this was headed by a former director general of the OPCW, who was sacked at the instigation of John Bolton, no less. And this report from the Courage Foundation says how sloppy and inappropriate that investigation was. And then before that, we had the engineering report that was published by Tim Hayward and this group of scientists who've been monitoring the situation in Syria, which suggests that the whole business of the canisters was wrong. So we have an accumulation of evidence now, which is really, really troubling and very disturbing, and which suggests that whole investigation was frankly fake. If I can just say what Jonathan Steele says, this whistleblower told him, or rather this source told, this person's yet a whistleblower. He said that the OPCW reported large presence of chlorine in particular area. And this investigator, he was an actual inspector, reported back to the OPCW, and he said chlorine appears naturally in many places. It's often used for industrial or semi-industrial purposes. And he did find chlorine in this location, but that he found it also in many other locations, and that there was no actual pattern that specifically pointed to chlorine having been used in a chemical attack. And this report that he sent was suppressed because the entire agenda was to argue that it was a chlorine attack. So I think this is a very big story. And I wonder how much longer the OPCW is going to be able to keep the official line that it's maintained up till now on the investigation in Duma without it being directly challenged.
They'll be able to keep it, Alexander, because no one's really reporting it.
Nobody's reporting it.
They've completely ignored it.
But outside the mainstream, and of course, apparently in the rest of the world, it is becoming increasingly widely reported there. And bear in mind, a lot of countries, I believe the Indian government, for example, is becoming increasingly worried about the politicization of the OPCW and maybe raising concerns about this. So I don't think the story is completely shut down.
We come full circle,
Yes.
Alexander, to how we started this live
Yes.
stream 2.5 hours ago with the IMF and how it's been politicized and how this institution is a complete sham.
Yes.
It's owned by the globalists.
Yes.
OPCW is no different.
No
different.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's been captured and controlled by them a long time ago, and I'm afraid the way it's conducted itself in Syria has been extraordinary and appalling.
All right, let's wrap it up. We have 3 more super chats from Sparky, but they're all connected. Thank you, Sparky, for those super chats. Sadly, Pompeo has Trump fooled. Pompeo actually tweeted positive about WikiLeaks in the last super chat is during the 2016 campaign. I didn't know that, but
no, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Wouldn't surprise me.
It wouldn't surprise me at all. And look how completely he changed the moment he became CIA director, because this observation about WikiLeaks being an intelligence agency, he made when he first addressed the CIA officials directly after he was appointed. So Pompeo changed his story, almost at once. I think Pompeo is a major political force within the Trump administration because, of course, he's an evangelical Christian, as is Mike Pence, and Trump depends on evangelical Christians to vote for him in order to gain re-election in 2020.
All right, Peter says that he's watching us as well. So Peter says hello to everyone in the live stream. And this is the last super chat from Sparky. Thank you very much. Globalists are behind problems on both sides of the pond. We will leave it there. I agree with that statement. Alexander, do you agree with that statement?
So do I. I'm sure Peter
Peter,
does.
if you're watching, do you agree with that statement? I think Peter will agree with that statement as well. And Alexander, let's wrap it up here. Thank you very much, everybody who tuned into this live stream. Alexander, very quickly, what are you looking at in the news?
Oh dear, I have to watch Brexit, obviously, and the fact that we now have an election in Britain, which is we're looking at major political developments in Britain. But beyond that, there is a rebellion now apparently in Germany within the CDU against Merkel. It seems to be gaining force. And we've also got major problems within the SPD because the election result in Thuringia was huge news. So we need to keep an eye on that. There's also this crazy impeachment that's happening in the United States. We're going to get the vote tomorrow. That's big news in itself because I think that's going to flush out how completely ridiculous this whole impeachment story is, but we will obviously be needing to keep an eye on that. Then there's the events in Syria and this extremely complicated chess game that continues to be played out there. And then, of course, we've got this big news about Nord Stream 2, which I think is very big news, actually. Denmark's now green-lighted it. And all sorts of things are going on in Ukraine. Apparently, Zelensky has finally managed to get the Ukrainian military to start withdrawing from the contact line in certain areas. And there's talk that there may finally be this summit meeting with Zelensky, Putin, Macron, and Merkel, assuming, of course, that Merkel is still there. It might happen sometime in November. So lots going on.
All right. PL2451, power outages in California. Remind me of a third world country. That's a ridiculous story. Crazy story. RD Bayat says we are all Assange. If he dies, so does our human rights. This is much more than freedom of speech.
It's so true. So true. And thank you for saying that.
Yep. And Gobarwala, thanks for an excellent chat. Most enlightening. Thank you, Gobarwala. Fluctus Reborn, who is drugging Assange? Someone ask next time.
Well, that's another very serious concern. I know that, as I said, I know people who are familiar with the whole situation, and they're extremely concerned about this and about the limited access that his lawyers and his assistance have been granted to him, which violates, by the way, prison regulations.
Yeah. You think he's drugged, by the way, Alexander?
Yes, I do, actually. I do think he's drugged. I mean, I don't know for a fact, but I do think he is.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for that, joining us for this live stream. Alexander Mercouris in London. Thank you very much, Alexander. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk, who is in Moscow. Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you to everyone who joined us, who sent us questions, who sent us super chats, who hit that like button. If you haven't hit that like button, hit that like button. Last super chat from Sparky, Alex, Christo, and Peter are the three musketeers. Thank you very much, Sparky.
Thank you.
For your questions as well. Guys, we hope you have a good day, a good evening, a good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody, take care of yourselves.
Mm.